I'm Gavi Levy Haskell, and I'm an art history and computer science double major at Smith College. The project I've been working on is a desktop editor so museums can make GPS-based iPhone audio tour apps. Now, you'd probably think from my majors that to me, technology in and for museums would be just the perfect thing. In which case you'd be thinking better than I did, at least until relatively recently. See, my idea of what technology looked like in a museum context came out of a world in which those clunky, secluded old booths with a desktop monitor and a rollerball mouse permanently embedded into a wooden table, the ones that would give you paragraph after paragraph of information, which I never saw anyone actually read, in which those were what museum technology meant. They might have been the absolute state of the art when I ran into them a decade ago, I really don't know. But I'm not sure if anyone actually has one of those anymore, frankly. So the point is, for a long time, I was hopelessly out of date. But that shouldn't be totally surprising, really. I wasn't visiting the Met. I wasn't visiting the Getty. I wasn't visiting museums with the resources to pull out all the stops as far as technology goes. It was actually standing in front of the Ishtar Gate in the Pergamon Museum in Berlin that the concept finally became exciting to me. If mostly fake Babylonian bricks can be that immersive, why not virtual ones? It seemed more profound at the time, of course, but the feeling has stuck with me. Meanwhile, technology has moved on, but a lot of smaller institutions still don't really have the resources to hire a developer to build them a snazzy new tool. Smaller institutions don't all lack interest, of course. I distinctly recall a family friend who works at a historical society pressing a business card into my hand and urging me to send to him, merely on the strength of my mentioning that I was interested in using technology to engage people in museum spaces. But it's often not a possibility. Which gives me the opportunity to do something a little less ambitious than rebuilding the Ishtar Gate, but still quite fun. So what I mean by a desktop editor for GPS-based iPhone audio tour apps is a Java application I've been writing that basically provides a thorough graphical interface so that no one ever has to directly touch any Objective-C code in order to make an audio tour app. This is what I want it to look like. This is what it looks like right now. Obviously, I still have a little ways to go, mostly in writing the pretty interface part, and then, actually testing the darn thing. But for the moment, I can at least tell you what I've done so far. The end goal is to be able to use the editor to produce iPhone apps that take advantage of assisted GPS, which basically uses GPS, Bluetooth, and wireless internet data to determine location. To use that to show museum visitors shorter lists of options than the whole museum collection before they can find what they're looking for. The fact that it's assisted GPS means that indoors it can probably narrow the location down to the room or wing you're currently in, but even with the additional data points, it won't really be able to tell you what painting you're standing in front of, unfortunately. It can do nearly that well outside, though, which is an idea I'll come back to later. So the first thing I had to do in terms of actual development was to write a template iPhone app so the desktop editor had something to put data in and change the colors of, and so on. This phenomenally uninteresting-looking app interface is the result of that. Of course, it shouldn't be particularly exciting yet. It really is just the template, so I could figure out what code the editor needed to generate, and which bits of the code it ought to change to do what to the app. Interestingly, well, interesting to me anyway, and hopefully to you too, creating the template was actually made more difficult by Xcode, the development tool for Apple iOS. It has a really nice interface which combines visual storyboarding for some of the overall elements of an app, and then manual coding for the components that are more complicated, technical, specific, or what have you. But the real problem is that it means the storyboard is in one programming language, and I'm genuinely unsure, by the way, what it actually is. I suspect it's specific to Xcode, and I probably should have figured this out by now, but it's straightforward enough that I've just gone with what felt right, and so far it's worked. But the point is, the storyboard is in one programming language, and the rest, say, the parts that determine what options to offer you based on location, those are in another language, Objective-C. So, that was a little surprising. What was worse was that what should really have been most trivial, the document that basically maps out where all of the files of the app are in the folder, that part became weirdly difficult. See, as well as the name and the file path, and some slightly cryptic words and numbers that I deciphered, correctly thank heavens, as indicating what the files were and so on, there were 24-digit numbers attached to each and every one of them. Which is the point at which I thank the skies for computer scientist mothers, because I was talking to mine about this mysterious number I'd run into. And she looked at me for a second and then said, "You mean a UUID?" Being the polite, gracious daughter that I am, naturally I replied, "Could you, repeat that in English?" Anyway, it turns out that the numbers were universally unique identifiers, so all I really had to do was randomly generate a 24-digit number for each file, and I was set. They're long enough that they're not really likely to overlap. That's actually the point of UUIDs. So once I had a working template, and more importantly, once I really understood the working template I had, it became mostly a matter of finding the best way to get the Java application to produce that template, while still keeping the important bits easily changeable based on user input. I toyed with the idea of storing a template app in the folder with the application, and having the application copy that and change what it needed to. Even though there are ways that would be more elegant, though, it quickly became evident that it wasn't the best possible solution. It would leave me with either taking the quick way of finding the right place to change things and using a fixed location, simply trusting that everything would be where I expected it to be in the files, which seemed downright dangerous, and taking the safe way, which would involve making the computer actually find the right place in the code to insert the next thing the user could change, which seemed disproportionately slow and ungainly. Instead, I decided to have the application generate a new set of files each time, based on the variables as they were currently set. It means the code is very, very ugly, unfortunately, but it also means that I can feel pretty confident that I know what it's doing each and every time. In order to be able to load previous work from the editor, it saves the variables in an easily readable format. So basically, a line-by-line list, that's actually in the folder of the app itself, but not in the map of the file system. With that all ready to go, I just had to make a graphical representation of all of those changeable options. This is, honestly, the same prototype I've had since January, but it's still a good representation of what I'm aiming for, though I'm thinking I might move the options for the audio tours to a different tab from the options for the appearance of the app. The general look of the thing, the sorts of options it has, and the preview pane are all still in the plan, though. The interface is mostly a straightforward technical problem. Figure out how to make it look nice, then do it. Just as I said at the workshop for this fellowship all those months ago about the programming of the rest of the project, it's the sort of problem that's best solved by locking myself in the basement for a few hours with an unreasonable volume of soft drink, and just coding. The one conceptual problem still outstanding has to do with something that hadn't even occurred to me as an issue at all until I actually started to work on the project. How does one get the GPS data of the various objects in the first place? The obvious solution is to send the user around to all of the locations with their iPhone, so I'm planning on writing a pretty bare-bones app for collecting GPS data for each of the tours they've added to their app. The problem, though, is getting that data back onto the desktop computer from the iPhone. It seems to me that there are three potential solutions: remotely accessing the computer, doing a wired transfer of the data, or manual data entry. Now, when I first say it, that last one sounds like the worst possible solution. No one likes data entry. Statisticians don't even like data entry. But asking the user to plug the phone into the computer puts up a potential technical barrier. And the whole point of the application in the first place is to minimize technical barriers. Plugging something in seems like a lot more work than sliding slider bars and typing into boxes. And remote access, while it's in many ways the most elegant answer, opens up a really unfortunate can of worms. If you can remotely access the data, what's to stop someone else? I'm not in the field of cybersecurity. I certainly can't guarantee that someone with an inexplicable vendetta and a better set of technical chops than I won't be able to re-record all of the audio files to say, "Please leave the museum. Art is boring. Go. Just go." So currently it looks like having the app produce a nice little table of numbers, and then making the user type all of them into the desktop editor by hand really is the best answer. But that doesn't make it any prettier. So if anyone's been struck with a sudden insight in the last minute or so, please do let me know when we get to the questions. So currently it looks like having the app produce a nice little table of numbers, and then making the user type all of them into the desktop editor by hand really is the best answer. It seems like every time I talk about this project with someone, he or she has a brilliant idea for what it could or should be used for. Before I even started working on this project, a professor in the English department at Smith recommended I talk to the botanical garden about the possibility of doing a tour of the trees on campus. The GPS is great outdoors, so the app could get the location down to the specific tree almost assuredly. And trees aren't exactly easy to label, but they're much more interesting when you can have an explanation of where they're from, what they are, why they're important, those sorts of things. Jeffrey himself actually suggested the editor might be of use to something like a college campus, which could use it to talk about historic buildings that wouldn't lend themselves to didactic labels either. People at a conference 2 weeks ago, Humanities, suggested possibilities like classroom assignments. Each student could produce her own audio tour app, or maybe admissions tours on holidays or at off hours. Last week, at a workshop for people in educational technology, one person even pointed out that a graveyard tour might be interesting, to provide a little bit of context for each person and who they were. That's the part that's really been the most fun for me in building this tool, is how many ideas and applications it seems to spawn. I'm trying to keep the app template and its options fairly open-ended, and I'm hoping that will allow for a lot of them to be doable, even with the editor as the plan stands. The idea once I've finished off all of the development is to do a prototype, and maybe look into having some other people do the same, so that I can get a little bit of information about what works as expected, what doesn't, what should really be some other way to begin with, and so on. Once I get the project to a pretty stable state, I'm hoping to put the code up on Github so that whoever's interested can download it, use it, modify it, extend it, do whatever they'd like with it, really. Of course, there are a lot of possibilities for extending it already. At the conference a few weeks ago, someone wanted me to make the tool dynamically gather information from the internet, or from some collective database for all the users of the editor. So for example, all the museums that use the editor and have a painting by Almut Dema could use one institution's overview on him. I'd be a little nervous of trying to take content control out of the hands of the user, for a number of reasons. Copyright and security not least among them. But the point is that there are quite a few directions I could go. For now, though, I really want to focus on getting the interface working, and then, as they say, release it into the wild. Thanks.